Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. On this channel, we discuss day-to-day problems people face in their lives. Let's start with the video. My boyfriend's best friend, who we'll call Tobias for the sake of this story, has always been notorious for being and acting in the language of pure jackass. It's just his thing to be an ace and hard to deal with in conversations or transactions or any intellectual exchanges or anything at all because he was always on his toes, ready to roast and throw around snarky comments at the people around him. And that made him sometimes questionably disrespectful and disrespected, and granted me many reasons to choose distance from him when my boyfriend and I started dating. There was always something a little bit different about the way he treated me because he wasn't entirely worthless with me, and I always just assumed it was probably because I was dating his best friend and he was doing it out of respect for the man he considered closest to him on the planet. Because seriously, if you listen to them talk about each other, you would think they had effed at least a couple of hundred times. They are an actual definition of the textbook version of childhood best friends that grew up to share every single damn thing about their lives. This information is important and comes into play later when I try to explain to you why I immediately broke up with my boyfriend when I found out why the best friend's behavior started changing towards me gradually. Like I said, in the beginning, he was really nice and indifferent towards me, and his rudeness wasn't cranked up to the max when he was interacting with me, which is something I always appreciated and something that made me respect his relationship with my boyfriend even more, and therefore never felt enticed to take much distance from him in the beginning. And as time grew and his comments became snarky and more aggressive and took a disgusted tone towards me, I was starting to have enough of it and was beginning to demand that my boyfriend intervenes and says something to him because I can only take so much as I have no reason to put up with his bullcrap. The way in which the story unraveled itself and starts making sense is if I tell you that recently we went on what you would call a typical college student get-together at a cabin in the woods that Tobias's parents owned and that they allowed him to host parties every summer. The only thing about it that was somewhat special was that this place was the reason for the start of a relationship that I genuinely had a lot of hope and faith in, and that everybody was impressed it even stayed afloat for so long, 2 years. My boyfriend and I had actually met at that very cabin. About 2 and a few months ago, I went there as the plus one for one of my girlfriends, and he was obviously invited by the parents themselves. When I first got there, Tobias was so different from the version of Tobias that I'm familiar with now, because at the time he was so kind-hearted and nice to me, and was joking about things and had a good, positive atmosphere to him, which is absolutely contradictory to the way he has been treating me in recent times. He was jumpy and funny and nervous to be around new people and introducing everyone to everyone instead of ignoring the presence of literally everyone around him other than my boyfriend and probably the girlfriend that had invited me. At first, when his attitude started changing towards me, I thought that maybe it was because he had a crush on me. But as I noticed how disgusting his remarks were and how intense his dislike was towards me, I realized that it was dumb as F to make that assumption as he was purely evil and incapable of having and thus showing positive emotion. Don't ask me how I made that deduction. It just happened in my head overnight. I analyzed it, accepted it, and lived with it. Anyways, back to the story. This time, when my boyfriend and I were invited to the cabin for one of Tobias's infamous steak and beer parties, I finally got to see that old girlfriend of mine that I haven't seen in a very long time, and we got the opportunity to catch up on life and talk properly and decently for the first time in so long. I tried using that emotional impulse to overshare and impress one another as a tactic to get her to tell me why Tobias was growing to dislike me at such a fast rate. I tried sneaking around and telling her that my boyfriend had finally told me why Tobias didn't like me so much, and I couldn't believe it, and it was so god-awful and intense, and her expression confirmed to me that it was exactly that, even though I had no clue that it actually was. She asked me to tell her what my boyfriend had told me in detail so we could talk about things in that trail. but I managed to convince her to tell me what she knows, and I will keep the rest to myself as a secret. And believe me, being a psych student grants you a few advantages, and this was just a scrumptious example of the few times I got to lavish in the fruit of my crap degree. That's a load worth of money debt and thousands of hours spent studying. The reason the relationship started out between me and my boyfriend is the start of a very quick spiral downhill, because she had apparently invited me to the party at Tobias's request, who had confessed to her that he liked me and had a little bitty middle school crush on me and didn't have the balls to ask me out. Enter to the scene, me coming to the cabin for the first time 2 years ago. When he was being nice to me at the party and treating everyone so decently, he was being manipulative and somewhat toxic, but had intended to ask me out at the end of that night. And he even tried asking my boyfriend to help steer him, as he was himself in a relationship at the time, which, mind you, I was never told of. When my boyfriend was asked to help, this man took it upon himself to ask me out and proceeded to make plenty of moves on me that night. Hence, we ended up going on a few dates in just the following weeks and started dating a couple more after. I guess my boyfriend effed over his long life childhood best friend that he basically considered more than his brother, walks up to him and asked him to help him land a girl. He would just shoot his shot and throw a middle finger towards him in the air like, "Hey, F you, bro," which is honestly very frat boy typical behavior. But what wasn't is the fact that my boyfriend was in a relationship at the time, and a long one, might I add. He was dating a girl from around 16 or 17 months as of us meeting, and promised her that there was nothing to worry about me. And the reason she knew about me, you might ask, it's because he asked me out as a dare. Are you effing kidding me? What is this? Pretty Little Liars? Not only did my boyfriend stab his best friend in the throat point blank because he couldn't turn down a stupid frat boy prank or whatever the hell it was, he proceeded to promise his girlfriend at the time and lied to her profusely about his feelings towards me, which is the only reason she allowed him to go on those dates, because in her mind, it was only for the sake of the prank and not actually him falling in love with me. It came to her utmost surprise when he walked up to her 2 entire months into our relationship and confessed to her that he had been seeing me this whole time and had fallen in love with me. So not only is he a cheater and a backstabber, but immature, disrespectful, and a total liar. He based our entire relationship on some stupid prank that he only agreed to increase, I guess, his social popularity or whatever alpha male frat boy ranking system that was based on manipulating other people's emotions and causing damage to one's loved ones. I think it's needless to say that the moment I asked him if everything was true and he confirmed to me that the entire story from start to finish was nothing more or less than what had actually happened, I told him that I didn't want to see his face or interact with him ever again, even though my entire world was crumbling on the inside, because this kind of contradicted everything I had experienced with him. And coming to see the side of him for the first time in our relationship really left an indent on me. Not the a-hole. I was terrified that you would finish up by saying that you're confused and torn between wanting to stay friends with him and the version that you had grown to love and whatever shit frat boy he was in the past, because this man's deserving nothing but to be dumped the F out of and granted the liberty to experience the pain he caused to everyone around him. Not the a-hole. Although Tobias might have had his reasons to be a little bit sour towards you, I don't understand why he has to be a Drake to everyone else, which only means that Tobias and your boyfriend are friends for a reason, and it's not just because they're childhood best friends, but because they're both Drakes, so props to you for leaving whatever toxicity loop of a relationship that might have turned into. Not the a-hole. That part he said about psych students only being able to take advantage of their degrees when needing to manipulate people into telling them truths that they don't want to share kind of hit home for me, because I came to learn one of the most important pieces of information in my life through this very technique. So you ain't gonna see me judging you for manipulating your poor friend. Next story. This is going to sound bad, but hear me out. I, 22 female, had a sister a few years older than me who passed away last year. When we were little, she was the golden child and bullied me a lot, but no one ever believed me about it. She got into a bad accident when she was a teenager because she was doing something stupid that she had been told not to do and ended up paralyzed from the neck down. My parents pretty much devoted all their time to taking care of her and seemed to completely forget I existed. So I learned how to take care of myself since they never ever had the time for me. My grandparents at least would take me out for birthdays and let me stay over at their place sometimes. Between my grandparents helping me out and a really good guidance counselor, I got into a very good university on scholarship and moved out as soon as I could. My parents never so much as texted me the entire time I was at university. I saw them once in 3 years when I was visiting my grandparents. My sister passed away early last year, and to be honest, I'm relieved. She was miserable. She wanted to die. I visited her a couple of months before she passed, and we were able to reconcile. I don't have bad feelings for her now. We were kids. Things happen. After the funeral, my parents started contacting me and trying to act all close. I ignored it. My sister was just a kid, but they were adults who neglected me. The situation was tough, but there were a lot of bare minimum things that they could have done for me and just didn't do. They don't get to go from barely speaking to me for years to acting like doting parents on a dime. I'm in a competitive doctoral program now, so the less outside stress, the better. I went to my grandparents for the holiday break, and my parents were trying to pretend we were all chummy and wanting to go out for lunch, and it made me feel irritated. I finally told them that I wasn't interested in spending time with them right now, and if they wanted a relationship in the future, they needed to back off and actually build one for real instead of trying to pretend nothing was wrong. That pissed them off. They tried to guilt me by telling me I didn't understand how hard having a completely disabled child was, and that she needed them more than me. I asked them if we would even be having this conversation about getting lunch together while I was in town if my sister was still alive. They didn't have an answer, so I told them that they put all of their chips in one bad bet, and they have to deal with the consequences. They don't just get to slide back into my life when it suits them. Cue the family drama. My grandparents have my back, but my aunts think it was a really cruel thing to say when my parents are grieving and trying to fix things now. I'm prepared to be the a-hole, I guess, because I don't exactly regret telling them off. I'm just not sure if this is a-hole territory. Not the a-hole. While it's hard for parents to have a disabled child to tend to, that's not an excuse for completely neglecting any others you have. You're all reeling from tragedy, but you owe your parents nothing, and not acknowledging that they messed you up mentally by emotionally neglecting you for years and subsequently expecting all to be instantly forgiven and forgotten is their flaw. Not the a-hole. Yes, having a disabled child is difficult, stressful, and more often than not, overwhelming. But they had more than one child dependent on them for care. You rose above that, and you should be proud. There's no logical reason to keep people who clearly don't truly care in your life. You're more than just a backup, like they seem to believe. Stand firm, keep your boundaries, and love on your grandparents for their unwavering support. Next story. 16 years ago, my son Matthew had a daughter with his now ex-wife Josie. I have always thought of Josie as my own daughter, so when they divorced 7 years ago due to my son cheating, I was conflicted and disappointed. Josie wasn't particularly close with any of her family, so my husband and I naturally took them in. Josie was an angel. She had insisted that we didn't have to lift a finger more than before we had taken them in, and though she was hurt, she kept civil around Matthew. My husband and I held a huge hand in raising their daughter Ruth, because Matthew remarried less than a year later and now has a 4-year-old son after disowning Ruth. 2 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was hard on everyone, especially Ruth. They were extremely close. She told him about her girlfriends and boyfriends before anyone else and has always wanted him to be the one to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. Matt rarely ever visited and didn't answer our calls often, saying that we had other kids, so it wasn't like my husband was dying lonely. Last night, Matt stopped to talk about inheritance. He never mentioned Josie nor Ruth and hinted that he thought he should get more inheritance than his siblings the entire time. My husband and I shared awkward looks until he decided to cut in. He explained that everyone would get a piece, but he'd focus more on Ruth and Bonnie, one of our other grandkids. Matt got really angry and said that Ruth was just a bastard and that his son deserved more than her. My husband got furious after that and left the room, saying that he wouldn't include Matthew at all. Matt yelled back and turned to me, saying that Ruth wasn't worth it because she'd just grown up to be a whore like her mother. I told him that I'd rather have her mother as my daughter than him as my son and insisted that he leave. I'm getting phone calls from Matt's wife and family friends saying that my husband and I just overreacted and he was just angry that we were playing favorites. Am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. Dude abandoned his family and only came back sniffing back around when his dad was in a bad state and he thought he might get something out of it. He couldn't even be civil and fake nice long enough for that conversation. Oh man, I have to commend you for being such wonderful supporters to Josie and Ruth. You and your husband are just amazing for loving them in the way you have. Your son clearly doesn't feel the need to be a part of your family. You say he rarely called or visited, and his demeanor is just abhorrent. You're doing the right thing. Thank you for being such good people. Even if your son is your son, and even though it must be very hard, the fact that you support Josie and Ruth over him is a beautiful thing. Your son has his perfect family, and it seems that getting beyond money from you, he has no use. He made his choices, not you, not the a-hole. Not the a-hole. I grew up in a very similar situation to Ruth, and as a young girl, knowing that one of my parents didn't love me was more hurtful, more heartbreaking than I can even begin to put into words. But no matter what was going on with my parents, with my horrible mother, my grandparents on both sides were absolutely ride or die for me and my sister. I can honestly say I would not have made it to adulthood without them, the most cherished loves of my life. In taking in Ruth and Josie and caring for them the way you have and continue to do, not only have you helped ease the burden of that pain for Ruth, but you've taught her what it really means to be family. You're the best kind of grandparents. Sorry your son is such a jerk though. That sucks.